happened that at one point my wife, we went to a wedding of some close relative, and my brother, a dairy farmer from your neck of there, from Mecca Glen.
Oh, yeah. Area.
Bashaw, yeah. So unbeknownst to me, he drives it to our yard, and here he's got a Jersey cow and a small milking machine, and that's the first time I heard of the arrangement my wife made. So for the next 5 or 6 years, or not that long, so we had, a cow stops giving milk, which means that the cow has to produce a calf every year. And then if you got a calf, you got to do something with it. I mean, it means that you're going to have to kill it eventually, or give it away, or sell it, or something. 3 options: either give it away, kill it, or sell it. And of course, the calf is a pet. And when you convert the calf into it ends up in your deep freeze.
Yeah.
The kids will take a bite of this piece of meat and say, "Is this Charlie?"
The turkey and the rabbit scenario for you again.
Well, whatever. You've got all these sort of things that come up that the city dweller often doesn't realize. That so it's neat, and so the variety that comes into the situation that you've got a patch of grass and enough of that patch of grass to hay, because you're going to have to feed the cow during the winter. So you're either going to have to buy bales of hay, or you're going to have to go and have a mower to cut the hay, because trying to keep up with even one cow with a scythe, it's a kind of a long proposition. But anyway, so you get this mower, which helps keep the lawn down and produces a stack of hay that usually, if you learn after a while how big that stack is, that will last the winter. And now you've got a couple ice cream pailfuls twice a day of a Jersey cow, that half of that is cream, which can be converted into the so Diana had probably a couple of recipes how to make cheese, and then you ate so much cream and you made your own butter that you noticed that you were putting on weight. If you're trying to consume what that dairy cow produces, probably you have to have 10 people that are tying into that one cow to consume what the one cow does. And then, of course, there's the bother that you've got to deliver the cow somewhere where the sex occurs that you will have another calf, because eventually the cow stops making milk. But anyway, there are all those sort of things that really tie you down to the soil. So you grow pigs. It means that the garden, if the garden is bigger, it means that now you've got the means to sustain a healthy pig, and the healthy pig will produce enough lard that you can make soap that you will enjoy pork ribs and bacon, and so you got to also know how to smoke the bacon, and on and on. So eventually, that's sort of close to the land. I've never really. You got all kinds of literature that there was a time we sent away for a lot of that, but I personally actually didn't really need it as much, because I was growing up in that milieu, so that I wasn't like I had a realistic notion to. But here in the issue of moving here to prove to people how inexpensively you could live, and with the idea that maybe I found that I made enough of a living teaching survival, but the intent was that maybe if I wrote and brought that income in through writing, plus what I grew myself, and plus what I would do was the information that people would enjoy. What do you want?
Ham and cheese in the fridge. We're leaving.
Yeah, okay.
So,
All right.
yourself some food.
Oh, it's after 12 here. In a short while, we'll have to take a break and make a sandwich.
No problem.
Yeah. But anyway, the issue is that when people ask me what's the difference between me and other people, as I'll explain, well, probably the fact that by the time I left home, I had a fairly realistic idea about what, how many fish do we need to feed? Where do the fish come from?
Mm-hmm.
The skill in fishing and catching. My father, I got the impression that my father enough fish using a hook. Ice fishing, but he used a snare.
Yeah, okay.
And so I think one of the things you did is that you got, there was a common thing called crushed oyster shell. That was what you provided your chickens. It seemed like healthy chickens would need to supplement their diet with crushed oyster shell. Well, when you throw a handful of oyster shells down the fishing hole, as the oyster shells, that attracts the fish. And you're sitting there with a canvas, and there's enough light that you can see. And when the fish swims into your snare it and pull it up. So he was explaining that, the process where if you try to use a hook and lure, you probably wouldn't be able to catch enough fish fast enough to maximize,
efficiency.
You want to spend 2 days of living out there camping while you're fishing. You want to maybe not spend 4 days of that sort of aggravation. But anyway, mushrooms and so here you are. You're 6 years old. You already know everything there is to know about mushrooms. That your parents have taught you how to help pick those mushrooms, and then you would see the results of them being dried, and then you see the results of them being incorporated into the diet. We picked a lot of mushrooms. There were mushrooms that you ate immediately. So the field mushrooms were something that you cooked an awful lot when they're ready to be picked. But there are certain mushrooms that you couldn't dry, and certain mushrooms that they were improved immensely by being dried. So the same place where anything is dried, up near in the attic, the warmest part of the house, a lot of drying going on there. And the mushrooms would increase in flavor and supplemented the diet. So if you're trying to use something local to give a nicer flavor to your stews and everything, that mushroom would play a role in being part of the stew to give it flavor.
You want to take a break here, Morris?
Yeah, take a break. Stop.
Okay, so we had a nice lunch there, Morris, and thanks for that. So just to slowly start working into wrapping this up, we're talking about the skills needed, multiple layers of skills needed to have a homestead type of situation and living kind of self-reliantly. You were just talking about having almost university level education or time spent. You want to touch a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I guess I call that outdoor education. And outdoor education is, by the time you teach the kids from kindergarten to grade 12, there's many subject areas that take, the subjects that we cover are tangible, you might say. So if you're going to talk about plants, for example, so if you take a botany type course and so on, you learn about recognizing a plant, which is the first step. And then the enjoyment of plants where you just look at them and smell them. Mm-hmm. But then there are certain plants, probably first off the bat, some of the most astounding usages is the medicinal applications of plants. And generally you find in the wilderness that the medicines abound, whereas the edible plants, that's another story again. Mm-hmm. Wild plants who have not been developed for our use, like potatoes and carrots and beets and corn, whatever, that's one thing. To try to derive the same amount of calories, that's a pretty challenging situation, expecting Mother Earth to provide you those. I have a booklet that's out that covers about 20 plants, of which they're so similar to what we could have grown in our garden that they're the same digestibility, and they're kind of very heavy. The prospect of heavy usage is there. So the challenge is that when you find that winter is over, you're anxious to be able to utilize the plant that fills your stomach as soon as possible. Well, there are about a handful of plants that come up that maybe by the middle of April, some of them already quite usable, like marsh marigold. They probably could have been utilizing marsh marigold about 2 weeks ago, because I often would keep my eye out. And there are regions where marsh marigold doesn't grow, but there are other plants that take the place of it. And that plant is the one that you're realizing that if you're going to eat something green and fresh that is still a couple months away from what grows in your garden, that's the plant you better know, and so on. So the complexity of utilizing the plants, the question comes up, how many do you need to know? Well, I probably have a dozen plants that grow in my garden, but I'm probably going to have to know close to 300 plants. I'm going to use the bush because they are there, and then they each provide just such a small amount. You have to know lots. And so if you know what those 300 plants are, then you're never going to be hungry. Well, how many university courses are you going to take? Well, you probably have to spend 80 hours on learning about the plants and how to feasibly incorporate them into your diet. Now,
and practice using them.
Yeah, and the thing is that type of survival, a lot of people confuse it. They figure that an important component of modern day survival is how to snare creatures and how to know your edible plants. The issue is that the normal person doesn't separate the issue from the modern survival training, which is more in the area where you get into an airplane and the airplane ends up in the middle of nowhere, and hopefully you manage to land without getting badly hurt or killed. Now you have to take care of yourself probably until somebody comes to your aid. That describes the sort of knowledge you have to have, not the knowledge where you're going to get out of that plane and start looking for edible plants and start, you're looking for probably firewood and water because you don't last very long with water. And the issue is the what you have to learn when the airplane stops moving and you try to get out of it before it catches on fire. It's an entirely different story than where you have taken a long time to learn how to sustain yourself. Whereas the person who is trying to learn how to deal with an airplane crash, probably you'll learn enough in 2 days, as opposed to weeks and weeks of training to fill out all these other sort of things. So if you got a manual and it says, here's how you build a survival shelter, and you better go and build one or two, because you will find that you've got a completely wrong idea about how long it takes, what it takes, and all the tools you should have brought or didn't bring. How do you get by without tools? And on and on. There's all kinds of stuff. So in defining survival, the biggest eye-opener that I ever had was a discussion about the need of desert survival knowledge by the military that fly over deserts in the Second World War. There was an article I read where it said that when a pilot dies needlessly, it'll cost $20,000 to the war effort to retrain a replacement pilot.
In World War II, that's the standards.
World War II. Well, today it's $1 million probably. A competent jet pilot, it's probably $1 million. And how many years do you take into that? And so on. But anyway, they figured, there was a phenomenon that occurred, that if people were rescued within 3 or 4 days, you can expect they'd be all alive. If you were rescued beyond that, like let's say, normally it takes 4